John has done amazing things, and usually I give an introduction, but I thought we would just kind of jump into a conversation and talk a bit about just his background and some of the important work that Ariel is doing. We have a pretty tight time frame. I'm going to be looking for others to give the prompt, but John is probably going to have to leave around 5:45. So I'm going to dispense with a lengthy introduction.
I have more time, and I'm whatever you guys are planning. But
okay, well, I'll stay with you as long as you, and I have to say, John and his staff were wonderful to work with. They just flew in from Chicago, obviously some tough weather. They're coming here. They met with some students earlier. We're going to have a good conversation here, and then they're flying back. So John has earned himself in the Institute's Hall of Fame. We have a little picture, a set of pictures on the wall that one of them is a former state senator from Illinois who went on to do some things. So maybe we can get your picture fixed up next to President Obama's. So, John, let's just maybe begin with, as I read about your background, just your amazing parents. Your dad was a Tuskegee Airman. Your folks met at the University of Chicago Law School. Your mom was the first African-American woman to graduate from there. So talk about them, the focus on education, and also what you called the world's greatest high school that you went to in Chicago. So John, take it from there.
So I was very lucky. As I get older, I really appreciate how fortunate I was to have two pioneering parents in completely different ways. And again, my dad was a Tuskegee Airman and ended up going to the University of Chicago Law School on the GI Bill. When he came back from the war, he had flown over 100 missions. He'd been in the first group of fighter pilots that went over during World War II, went overseas to fight. And at first they turned him down at the University Law School, but then he came back the next day in his captain's uniform and convinced them to let him into the University of Chicago Law School. So he always thanked the GI Bill. He thought it was something that really helped to prompt his career and get him off the right track. He met my mom on the first day of law school. She had already been there for 2 years, and she was the class of 1946. And they had two different, completely different backgrounds. My dad had grown up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Both his parents had died by the time he was 12. So he had been orphaned, and he moved to Chicago to stay with a kindly uncle who agreed to take care of him and his sister. He lost two sisters to tuberculosis. His father had been a barber. It was just, he had had a really rough and tough time coming along. He became a short order cook, ultimately went to Chicago State for college, and was a math teacher before he got inducted into the Air Force. My mom came from a much more sort of privileged background. Her father had been a lawyer. He had helped start the first black bar associations in the country, and he'd been very engaged in that. He had helped argue one of the famous cases in the Supreme Court of Hansberry versus Lee. That was all about the restrictive covenants in Chicago, and it went to the Supreme Court, and he with some other African-American lawyers fought that battle and won. His father was J.B. Stratford, who had the Tulsa, the largest black-owned hotel in the country that was located in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was burned down in the Tulsa Race Massacre. So his father, my great-grandfather, had was really a part of history. So again, he was just so lucky to have a mom that had an accomplished dad, an accomplished grandfather, all of them committed to civil rights, all of them committed to fairness and economic justice, all of them willing to speak out and fight for fairness. And the final thing I'd say about my mom is that, I was an only child, and I went back and forth between my parents' homes because they got divorced when I was 3. But she was seriously considered by Richard Nixon to be a Supreme Court justice during the early 70s. And we actually have a tape of Richard Nixon talking to my mom in the Oval Office about accepting the job as Deputy Solicitor General of the United States with an eye for the idea, with the idea that this would be a pathway for her to become the first woman on the Supreme Court. So it's been kind of cool to actually hear the tape. We just recently came across it, and we're getting the transcript. And so, long way of saying I've been very fortunate to have some wonderful, extraordinary parents that again, I appreciate more and more as I get older.
And just as I've read your story, at the age of 12, I think it was, your father had bought some stocks for you and just introduced you into the world of economics and finance. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, how a 12-year-old getting a stock certificate and kind of looking at it and saying, what is this instrument? So talk about your introduction into the world of finance.
At first, it wasn't fun to go to the Christmas tree and get an envelope. Again, my dad wasn't wealthy, as I suggested earlier, so it would be $200 worth of Commonwealth Edison stock or $200 of General Motors stock. He'd buy a blue chip, stock for me, and my dad was very insistent. He wanted me to learn everything to know about the market, so he made me read the annual reports of the companies that was sent out every year, the quarterly reports that the companies would send out in those days, and I'd read about those companies. He had me read his newsletters. He was subscribed to various newsletters on the stock market, and I would read those from beginning to end. And I just got more and more interested in it. He introduced me to a stockbroker who was a guy on LaSalle Street named Stacy Adams, and he was the first African-American stockbroker in Chicago. And he became my mentor, my role model. I would just go and sit with him and watch the ticker tape go by. And the final thing that my dad did was really smart, though, is he let me keep the dividend checks that back then would come in the mail. And I'd get $20 check from Commonwealth Edison and $15 check from whatever, and that was kind of cool, to be able to get your own checks from these companies and learn about how you owned part of the business and you were getting a real return.
Well, then you went to Princeton and studied economics. And I guess two questions. One, were you particularly focused on finance, or was it just kind of the broader economics? And also, this is a separate question, you're also famously on the Princeton basketball team. And I think you were co-champions of the Ivy League your senior year. But we're coached by a kind of iconic coach who's you've described him as a transformative force in your life. So talk about Princeton, both the academic piece and then also sports, and how the mentoring of that coach was so critical to you.
Well, both they were. I love basketball. I have to say that was my first love. It was my passion, and I was very lucky to make the basketball team at Princeton. When I was back when I was playing, freshmen couldn't play varsity, and I literally got the last uniform on the team sophomore year. There was 15 uniforms. I got the uniform of a kid who flunked out during the summer, and if that guy had not flunked out, I would have left Princeton and come home and tried to play at the University of Chicago. That was my game plan that I told my parents. But luckily, Coach Carrill kept me on the team, and we were preseason top 20 that year. And it was just an extraordinary experience to play for a Hall of Fame coach. He was there for 29 years. He just had, had this great reputation. He was an extraordinary teacher. He made you understand how to be successful, you had to think about your teammates first, always. And coaches always talk about that, but he really made you understand how if you made the right pass or made the right cut, you did what was best for the team, good things would happen to the team, good things would happen to you, and it was a much more fun way to play. And all of us who learned to play that way, none of us went back to the way we played before we got to Princeton, where you were thinking about how many points you scored and how you looked, and all that went away when you played for Coach Carrill. And then the other part of it, he was extremely demanding. He wanted every cut exactly the right angle. Every pass had to be right in the right pocket. If it was off here, he would say, "Coach," he'd say, "Pass is off." If the pass was here, he'd say, "Pass is off." He corrected every mistake every single time. And when I had a chance to speak at his memorial service 2 years ago, I talked about the fact that he never took a play off. He was just relentless in making sure that it was done, again, exactly the right way every single time. And he'd always tell us, "Do you want me not to notice?" Sometimes I say, "Coach, we wish you wouldn't notice our mistakes." But he was extraordinary. And the final thing I would say, I was just so lucky to make the team sophomore year. He would go down what he would call after practice every day and talk about each player. And I'd made the team, and when he was going and started to talk to me about it, after a week or two I'd been on the team, he got to me and he said, Johnny Rogers, you're not a basketball player. You have no idea what you're doing. You're legally blind and I can't teach you to see. Because you can't see, nobody wants to play with you. But we'll keep you around for a little while and see what happens. You play so hard, I don't want to have to cut you. And so I ended up still, again, being there 3 years later. My last game that I played in was pretty much the last I played in meaningful minutes was we played Duke at Cameron Indoor Arena senior year. And after the game, Coach Carroll came into the locker room and said, Johnny Rogers, it's not fair to have you on the court with players that good. And never played again because Duke was so good and we played so badly that day. He just sort of don't want to watch you any play. I don't want to see you playing anymore. So anyway, basketball was a big part of my life. It was a hard experience, but he made me a better person. And it had a transformative impact on the way that I live my life today, and the way that I built Ariel, and the way that I show up civically in our community and try to be a helpful teammate to Chicago, helpful teammate to the institutions that I care about, and that's what was really important. Last part, you talked about being an economics major there. The good news, the most important thing was we had to take a course in corporate finance, and they made us read a book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street that was written by the head of the economics department at the time at Princeton, a man named Burt Malkiel. And it's arguably one of the greatest books ever written. And I was just so fortunate that the writer of that book was at Princeton. And he just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the book. It's been reprinted and updated time and time again. I've stayed in touch with Professor Malkiel. We had him talk to our board retreat last year, and even in his 90s, he's sharp as a tack. So the chance to have been a part of learning about the way he thought about markets had a profound impact on the way that I started to think about the markets when I started my career at William Blair.
Well, let's pick it up there. You started your career at Blair, and then 3 or 4 years later, you said, I'm going to go out on my own. You raised money from family and friends, assembled about $200,000, and started your own firm, named it Ariel after, I think, a character in one of your favorite TV shows or something. But talk about, the audacity of a 24-year-old saying, I'm going to plunge into the investment world, and talk about how you built Ariel and what your hopes were.
Well, I was 24 when it started, so I was at William Blair for 2.5 years, and I was saying earlier to some of the students that one of the things that I was excited about was I had an investment strategy that I thought was fairly original back then, to focus on smaller, mid-cap companies, smaller companies, and buy them while they're out of favor at an undervalued prices. And back then, there were just not many people doing that. Most people focused on value. If they looked at value stocks, they were large cap value stocks. If they looked at smaller stocks, they were growth stocks. So again, we were pretty original in putting those things together and using a Warren Buffett approach to the small and mid cap value universe sort of made us kind of special. And I wanted to create a strategy that would outperform the broad market, the S&P 500. And that was the way that I thought was the best way to do it. And so that was exciting that I had, again, something, I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've got to have a product that's different and unique if you're trying to be successful. I got a friend from high school to quit her job and become my deputy, and the two of us just opened up, 307 North Michigan. And it was a little small room, and with this idea that we'd be the first African-American owned money management firm in the country's history. And so, like you suggested, we went out and went to friends and family, people I had grown up with, mom and dad, and former clients of mine from William Blair, where I was a stockbroker, and raised that money. And like most entrepreneurs, I thought it would last, a couple of years. We went through that all the money in the first year. And so we had to go back to all the investors and ask for them to give us more money. And fortunately, almost everybody did. They had faith in us. We showed that we were on the right track. I think the things that we did that helped us, we created a brand around patience. I thought if you're 24, who's going to give us money to manage? A college endowment or a pension fund or an individual investor. If you're 24, they're going to be concerned you're going to be too risky with their money, that you're not going to invest it prudently. And so I thought one way to show that we were going to be prudent and careful investors was to create a logo around the tortoise. And the idea that Aesop's fable really would work, that if it's slow and steady wins the race, the tortoise beats the hare at the end, and it was a good message to send to prospective investors that we were going to be patient and prudent with their money. And it was nice to have like a cute little tortoise logo that would distinguish us. Because, you think about it, T. Rowe Price has a ram, Dreyfus has a lion, Merrill Lynch has a bull. The tortoise is a quite different message, kind of a symbol and message. And so it's really worked. Over all these years, people have said, gosh, that's really an original kind of a way. So this theme of patience was something we started with. And we had a newsletter called The Patient Investor. And we had a couple clients that gave us money to manage right away. I always tell people Howard University was our first client. They gave us $100,000 to manage out of their endowment. And that gave us confidence. And the city of Chicago the next year gave us $1 million to manage out of their pension plan. And we were able to build a track record from there and demonstrate that our approach to investing was really working, both with performance from those clients as well as the ideas that we talked about in our newsletter. It gave people, again, a sense that we were being thoughtful with how we invested. We would write in the newsletter why we like this stock and that stock. We would talk about our views on the markets. And I think all those things were done with kind of a careful perspective. And slowly but surely, we started to grow. The last thing I'll say is that 1987 in some ways was a blessing. The stock market dropped 22% in one day. See, a few of you can remember that horrible day. And what we did is we tried to do what Warren Buffett talks about, to be greedy when others are fearful. So we called our clients and said, we want to put more money into the markets while the market's crashing. And we took advantage of that crash in the markets and bought bargains. We did really well because we bought the stocks at cheap prices. When the market rebounded, we had great performance. And then in 1988, those stocks made us one of the top 10 performing mutual funds in the country, and got to be co-mutual fund manager of the year in Sylvia Porter's magazine. Started to get on shows like Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser, which again, a lot of you are too young to remember, but it was a great opportunity to be able to show people that we had actually executed our strategy under pressure and that it worked. And that sort of set us on the trajectory. So now we have about $15 billion under management and about 130 people. So it's great that I can have a great team of people to share responsibilities with.
I want to talk for a second about your work style, because I saw an interview in which the interviewer said, now I understand you don't email and you don't have a computer. And you said, yeah. And then, of course, there was a predictable kind of teasing about being a Luddite. But then I read an interview in which you say, I want to be able to read and think during the day and not have someone else control my agenda. Reading emails all day is constantly taking you away from your concentration. So talk about just that kind of strategic decision not to have a work environment where you're not constantly being interrupted and distracted, and talk about how you try to think through and to read and to study as you approach your investments.
Well, Warren Buffett often talks about the fact that he reads for a living. He reads all day long. You're reading the annual reports of the companies you're investing in. You're reading the research reports from all the brokerage firms. You're reading the research reports from your own team that are writing up and explaining why an investment's a good one or a bad one. And you're reading Morningstar and Value Line and all the different publications that are out there. And of course, the newspapers, the magazines, the books on the market. There's just something always constantly out there to read. So you want to be able to, I think, carve out time to read and think, as you suggested. I think that's important. I'll just go to McDonald's and find a quiet corner and just read and get away from all the hubbub at the office. And I think having a chance to think a little bit, think outside and think long term is important. I do text. And it's just quite people can constantly get to you. It's, I think it's hard for you to concentrate. It's hard for you to remember what you're reading when you're constantly being interrupted. So I'm trying to protect myself from that as possible. as much as possible. On my phone at home or my phone and my cell phone, you can't leave a message. I don't want people to be able to, to do that. And as you said, I don't email, and I'm kind of quirky that way, But I grew up as I said earlier, I grew up as an only child. I went to the University of Chicago High School, which you mentioned is kind of a great place. But the University of Chicago is known for its independent thinking, its free expression. It's a place of rigorous debate and ideas. So I think that's important, that you don't feel the need to follow the crowd and be like everyone else. Just because everybody else emails, I don't have to email. I'm on boards where, like, I'm on the board of Nike and the New York Times, and everybody's sitting in the room with their laptops or their iPads, and I'm the only one that doesn't have it. And if they all get a lunch, from the cafeteria for lunch, they bring in a standard lunch for every director, and then they bring me a hamburger and French fries. It's like there's no reason that I have to eat what everyone else eats or do what everyone else does. But I think it's important as an investor. To be a successful investor, you have to think independently. And if you're going to really be greedy when others are fearful, you have to be able to feel comfortable standing alone and not succumb to the pressure to sell when everyone else is selling and buy when everyone else is buying. If you do that, you're guaranteed to have mediocre results or average results if you follow the crowd all the time.
Well, I want to talk about some of the tenets that kind of undergird your company. The one that I was struck by is called active patience. And it's the notion of being patient, but also, you say, to be constant, to be dynamic, probing, asking questions. Talk about that, the sort of your approach to being patient.
Well, I think Melody Hobson, our co-CEO, some of you might have heard of Melody Hobson. She's been with our firm now 33 years. And I met her as a 17-year-old prospective student when I was helping recruit minority students to Princeton. And I always tell people I was volunteering to help my alma mater and met my most valuable player. So she's the one that's come up with this idea of changing the tortoise from slow and steady wins the race to active patience. That's what she's been talking about a lot lately. But I think what it gets at is that even though we buy stocks and we'll own them for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we always take a long-term horizon with everything that we do. And again, build the firm around that long-term perspective. You're constantly trying to probe and get the best information possible when you're picking stocks. And I was talking to the students earlier, Charlie Munger always says a portfolio shouldn't be like Noah's Ark, where you own 2 of everything. You want to have concentrated portfolios and concentrate in those names that you know really, really well, and those stocks that you know really well. Warren says you want to invest in your circle of competence. And it's hard to be an expert at every industry and to stay very focused. But you're constantly, and our job is, we get access to management and talk to them every quarter. And what you also spend a lot of times, not only do you talk to the management teams of the companies you're investing in, but you want to talk to all the customers that you can. So use an example. Like we own, our worst stock this last year is Leslie's Pools. How many of you know Leslie's Pools? Yes, no one's got a swimming pool? Or, yes. Leslie's Pools, at least somebody does. Maybe they're not big down here, but they're they're the largest retail pool company in the country. You go and you get your chemicals tested there. You buy the chlorine and things you need for your pools. You can buy the floaties. You can buy all the things that keep your pool fresh. So we've gone to Arizona to meet with the management team there and visit them and get to know them well. And we talk to them every 3 months. But you also are talking to everybody I know that owns a pool. I'm asking them, are you using Leslie's or not? Where do you get your chemicals? We talk to the professionals, so sometimes people hire someone to take care of their pools. We've been talking to as many of those professionals as possible. We're talking to people at Lowe's and Home Depot to see, are they selling competing pool products that make it difficult for Leslie's to be successful? There's big competitors out there. And so that's kind of what we're doing actively, constantly trying to gather more and more and more and more information. A great writer, Robert Caro, who's written these famous books about Lyndon Johnson. He's won a Pulitzer Prize. He started out as an investigative reporter, and his boss told him early in his career to always turn one more page, to look for more information. Take that extra effort to turn one more page all the time. And so that's what I'm always constantly reminding our research team, is you can't just sit back and listen to management or read the research reports. You've got to be active out there, actively looking for fresh information to help you make better decisions on the companies that you own.
Well, one of the other concepts on your website is called focused expertise, and it says, we go deep, jacks of all trades need not apply. And I think Melody has said, experts are people who know more and more about less and less. So talk about just kind of the tension between having a big holistic view and then not being spread so wide that you don't really understand anything in the sort of detail that you need to.
Well, I think it's interesting. Most mutual funds, and I have a lot of friends who work at Fidelity and Vanguard, and we actually manage a fund for Vanguard. We have lots of friends at these different funds, but most of them have hundreds of stocks in the portfolio. They have way more companies than we would follow. And the reason they do that is they don't want to be too far off the indexes, because the risk is if you don't look like the index, you own a narrower group of the stock market, there's going to be times when you're wildly out of favor and you underperform, and then clients will fire you. And so it's safer to own a little bit of everything, and you're never too far out of whack with the S&P 500 or whatever your respective indexes you're competing against, and then people won't fire you as readily. But if you think about it, again, as I said earlier, if you own the same stocks that everyone else does, you just are guaranteed to have mediocre results. And then when you pay your mutual fund fees, you're going to underperform almost for sure. Maybe you'll underperform a little bit, but you'll underperform. If you want to have a chance to outperform and have a record like Warren Buffett or some of the great investors, you've got to be willing to take larger bets in those areas that you know really, really well. And there'll be times you're going to look stupid, times you're going to feel embarrassed, times you're going to underperform dramatically. But if you know your companies really well and you stick to your circle of competence, you'll be able to take advantage of opportunities that come whenever the market has an inevitable decline. You'll be able to buy more of your favorite stocks because you know them cold, and you know the market is all of a sudden giving them away at a bargain price. You can take advantage of that and have wild outperformance. Then at the end of the day, after you look at a 10, 20, 30-year record, you'll have been able to outperform because you didn't feel the pressure to be like everyone else. But it's hard because, again, consultants and others will come in and say, Ariel underperformed here, you got to get rid of them. And but we want to play the game to win over the long run. And so therefore you got to be comfortable, again, not looking like everyone else.
Well, Ariel is the oldest Black-owned money management firm in the United States, so a historic institution in that respect. And I know you and Melody are really focused on being good citizens and being aware of some of the bigger issues in our society, particularly the wealth gap, opportunity gap, and so forth. And I want to touch on a couple programs that you have that relate to this. And one that I was struck by was called the Black Corporate Directors Conference that you started in 2002. So talk a little bit about what inspired that initiative.
What inspired it from two places. I've been lucky, as I mentioned earlier, to serve on some really great boards of directors. And over the years, I've served everywhere from a trustee at Princeton, Chicago Symphony, to being on the board of Bank One, and Exelon Corporation, and just many others. And then at the same time, wearing my day job hat, we talked, as I said earlier, several times, we talked to management teams all the time. And we talk to them about the diversity of their boards and, how are they really looking like America, and in terms of the people they put onto their boards of directors. But one of the things that became clear through my experience as an investor and my experience as a board member was that, companies would have big initiatives around diversity and inclusion, which I know has gotten to be kind of controversial these days, but you never heard that they when you talk to a CEO, they would say, my black director, my minority director has been pushing me to do more business with minority companies. And here's what we've done at the behest of my directors. You never heard that. When you looked at history, General Motors, used to have operations in South Africa during apartheid. They had a board member named Leon Sullivan. He was a reverend. He was very outspoken. He created what was called the Sullivan Principles that ultimately forced General Motors out of South Africa and helped create momentum to get corporations to leave South Africa and put a lot of pressure to end apartheid. So his leadership made a difference. He spoke up, he spoke out. He was like the late Congressman John Lewis. He was willing to make good trouble and fight for, fairness in South Africa. I didn't see those kind of profiles encouraged in the research that I was doing in the companies that I was talking about. There were no next generation Leon Sullivans. So the idea was that we had, with a friend of mine who ran the Chicago office of Russell Reynolds, the executive recruiting firm, we would create a conference, invite African American directors and more Latinx directors to come together and learn how to be leaders in the boardroom from each other, get best practices and best advice, learn how to fight for economic justice once you're in the boardroom, and see what had worked and what hadn't worked from your peers that were there. And that's been the goal from the last 20 years. Learn how to be a leader in the boardroom and learn how to lead around these economic justice issues that are so critical in our society today, where we know the wealth gap is getting worse and worse and worse between the black and brown communities and the majority communities. It's much worse today than it was 40 years ago. So if we don't speak up and speak out, nothing's going to change at those corporations and those institutions, whether it's a hospital, a university, a museum, or a large corporation. So it's been really cool. Over the years, we've been really blessed. To get crowds to your conference, we started out at 35 people the first year. Now we have typically 200 directors, but you have to get really wonderful speakers. So we've had a wide range of speakers. Shonda Rhimes has come to speak at our conferences. We've had great African American CEOs like Ursula Burns and Ken Chenault from American Express and Don Thompson from McDonald's. Great directors every year. Great CEOs every year. We've also had white CEOs, Jamie Dimon, Elon Musk, people like that. We had the commissioners of the NBA, NFL, and WNBA last year. That was pretty amazing and pretty fantastic. We had 3 African American CEOs of major public utilities, and we just have had great people. We had President Obama has come and spoken at the conference. Valerie Jarrett, people like that from the political world. Nancy Pelosi's been there. This year, Leader Jeffries is going to be there. Hakeem Jeffries will be there. So we really have been great. But the bottom line, I'm going on a long time because it's really been an important thing for us, and hopefully for our society and for our country. Every Friday we have what's called the conscience of the conference. Someone that's going to remind all of us the responsibilities we have to speak up and speak out. And so over the years, we've had the late Congressman John Lewis. We've had people who've marched with Dr. King, like Harry Belafonte, former ambassador and Mayor Andy Young. We've had Reverend Jesse Jackson. We've had, just extraordinary leaders like that that had real commitment to the civil rights community and had worked really hard to make a difference, to create wealth in our communities, create equal opportunity for all of us. So we think it's just been important. And hopefully every year we get these directors to agree on 3 Ps to measure the philanthropy, how much of the dollars going from major corporations are going to institutions that are touching people of color. Of course, measuring the people, the diversity of the leadership ranks, who's in the C-suite, who's on the management committees, who's running these companies, and then measuring the purchasing by category to see are using black law firms and accounting firms and tech firms, as well as construction firms and catering firms and things that are important. But measure everything by category and use the term business diversity and supplier diversity to show that your institution is open to working with minority companies in everything it spends money on, not just traditionally the supply chain, low margin parts of the spend. So we're on a mission around this, and it's really important. And we added Deloitte as a partner to go along with Russell Reynolds, and looking forward to this fall. I think it's about 24 years now.
Talk, if you would, about the Ariel Academy and its focus on, I think it's located in the south side of Chicago with a heavy focus on financial literacy for the students. Talk about that initiative and what it means to you.
Well, the Ariel Community Academy is about 27 years old. So it's funny, these things we start doing, they seem to stick around for a long time. When we started it, former Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, was working at Ariel overseeing all of our community affairs. And he came up with the idea of creating a small public school with small class sizes and great, robust after-school programming. And after the school was open for a couple of years, I sort of came up with the idea that we should be teaching kids about the stock market. Like, what were we thinking? We've got a great small school here, but we should be teaching kids about investing. And financial literacy is more important than ever because, as you know, as pension funds disappear and you have your own 401k plan or 403b or 457, you've got to pick your own funds and make your own investment choices. So we borrowed from my dad's idea. We came up with this idea that every first grade class would get a $20,000 class gift. And the kids would watch us basically manage it for the first 6 years. They'd have financial literacy concepts embedded in the curriculum for the first 6 years. And they would start to learn the lingo and language of the investment world. And then in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, much like what you have here at SIU, the kids start to pick real stocks with real money. And that was something really great for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to be able to do research, come down and talk with our analysts at Ariel. We would go down to the school and talk to the kids about, again, how do you research the companies? How do you make decisions around investing? And what we found was that not only did the kids love learning about picking stocks, but they would go home and talk to their parents about it. And often their parents never invested in stocks. The young people became kind of the gurus of the family, teaching their extended family about the magic of compound interest and the importance of picking, getting your money into the markets. And then in 8th grade, when the kids graduate, we take $20,000 and give it to the next first grade class. So it's become a self-perpetuating program. The kids take a portion, let's say the $20,000 has grown to $50,000. Just use that as an example. They would take a portion of that $30,000 profits and find a class gift, create a class gift. So maybe improve the sound system in the auditorium, have new computers for the investment class. And then whatever's left over, the kids get to keep, but if they put it into a 529 program, they can, if they put it in a 529 program, we match it with $500. And so we're trying to teach the kids the importance of matching. So it's been a wonderful program, and one of the other side benefits is not only the parents learning about investing, many of the kids have started to think about financial services careers from coming down to our offices and us coming down and speaking to them. And that's been kind of fun. And many of these students, they've grown older, gotten older, have become interns at Ariel. Some have worked full time at Ariel. And that's been a special benefit also of the Ariel Community Academy. It's about 330 students there currently, all African American, almost all. We keep hoping that we will be able to get more financial institutions to partner with urban schools in a similar fashion. President Obama asked me to chair a council on financial capability for young Americans, and that was a recommendation we gave to the president after the end of the council. So we're hopeful, but I have to say not a lot of people have followed in our footsteps with this.
Tell us about the Rogers Internship Program in Finance.
Well, that one is more recent. That's only about 5 or 6 years old. And the idea there is to have minority students at the University of Chicago, where I'm vice chairman of the board. They get paid summer internships to work in the investment offices of major endowments. And when I got to Princeton, I had no idea that they had an endowment office. I think University of Chicago has over $10 billion endowment now. I think Princeton might be over $40 billion. People don't think about that, especially kids of color. They get to college, they get to university and don't realize that there's this office there. And so the idea of this idea is that by getting a summer internship in the investment offices of major endowment, you're going to learn about how the endowment invests their money. And the endowments usually have their money diversified in not only common stocks and bonds, but of course international investing, emerging markets investing, hedge funds, private equity, real estate, crypto. People have the money diversified everywhere. So if you're a young person, you're trying to learn about the stock market or learn about investing, there's no better place to learn about investing than in the endowment office. And then so many of the young people these days care about purpose. If you're in the endowment office here at your university, and you care and love your university, if you're helping those assets grow faster, you're really having an impact. You're making a difference for that institution you care about. It could be a hospital, it could be a foundation, it could be anything like that. So we've had over 150 kids go through the program. We have 20 every summer. They'll get a chance to work everywhere from, again, the University of Chicago's endowment office to the Kresge Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation. You go down the list of the largest foundations in the country these young people are getting exposed to. And we think it's been really exciting. And then finally, if you work in an endowment office, I always ask the kids, what do you think the endowment CIO makes? And most people think there's no way that the endowment CIO makes more than the football coach or more than the president. But like at Princeton, the chief investment officer makes $4.5 million a year. He lives in a nice, wonderful community in Princeton, New Jersey. All the biggest investors in the world come to see him and ask to manage part of the endowment. And it's a pretty good lifestyle, and it pays well. So I think that's why I want to get young kids of color exposed to that.
Well, John, as we start to wind down, for students out there, what kind of advice would you give them for thinking about their career, launching their career? The tortoise metaphor might be something that obtains in terms of slow and steady. So that, and also in the importance of mentors, both in your life and just broadly, the importance of mentors in helping careers develop.
Well, I think that I already mentioned one path. I always tell everyone to think about the endowment office as a permanent career path. I think that's something that people, again, need to think about and often haven't thought about until I sort of mention it. When I talk to parents and grandparents, I tell them about that career path. David Rubenstein is the chairman of University of Chicago. He founded a firm called Carlyle, and he's a multi-billionaire. He has his own television show also on Bloomberg. He does a lot of different things. He's like the most multitasking person I've ever met in my life. But he tells everybody to go into private equity. And people make a lot of money in private equity, and there are many of the billionaires in the country are in private equity. The wealthiest African American entrepreneur, Robert Smith, made his wealth in private equity. And the other place, of course, is hedge funds. So it's hard not to argue about, if you're thinking about finance and you're thinking about an investment career, you want to be, if you're going to work 24/7, you might as well be somewhere where it's going to pay really well if you want to have a financial services career. I always ask people, you might have read Trump had a big fundraiser last week, and it was at the home. And anyone know where he had his big fundraiser last week? Raised like $60 million, I think. It was at guys.
John Paulson.
Yeah, you got it right, John. You're on top of it. So John Paulson is a hedge fund manager. During the financial crisis, he made more money in 1 year than any hedge fund manager in history. They wrote a book about him called The Greatest Trade Ever Made. What do you think John Paulson made in 1 year during the financial crisis? Anyone want to guess?
$2 billion.
$2 billion. Close. He made $5 billion in 1 year.
It's $1 billion here, $1 billion there.
Yeah. He made $100 million a week. You think about that. So I tell people, it's again, if you're going to go into this field, why not go into the one where you can, if you're lucky, you can be, or lucky and talented, I should say, and you could make extraordinary amounts of money, create multi-generational wealth for your family. make a difference in the communities that you care about. You know, he's using his wealth to help Donald Trump get elected. You know, everyone has a right to do their philanthropy the way they'd like to do it, their political empowerment. But, you know, I think we want to have more folks from minority communities and disadvantaged communities being able to fully participate in our capitalist democracy. You know, it's the best system ever invented, and we want to fully participate in all aspects of it and not just always go down the career paths that sometimes don't lead us to those highly successful outcomes.
John, this is a little off point, but we were talking earlier, and Ariel, of course, has been, made history in a number of different respects. But one kind of intriguing bit of history is you were the first home of the Obama transition team in the fall of 2008. Tell everyone that experience and what that was like to welcome the president-elect.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So, many of you remember there was a great celebration in Grant Park when Barack was elected. It was just magical, and for a lot of us. And I have to be full disclosure. My mom was Republican, my dad was a Democrat, so I grew up in a bipartisan, way, and I became a Democrat eventually. But it was just magical. He needed a temporary transition headquarters for the first 3 days after his election. And he decided to start his government in our offices at Ariel Investments. So we have pictures of him in our major conference room starting to form the government. And everybody was there, Vice President Biden, David Axelrod, Valerie Jarrett, Rahm Emanuel, Jim McDonough, all these folks. And we've heard that he picked Tim Geithner be the Treasury Secretary in our offices. He picked Rahm to be the Chief of Staff in our offices. And it was like a big secret, But as you can imagine, the security was crazy. You had to go through a magtrometer just to get onto the 29th floor of the Aon Center. There were these giant dogs, big men with big guns to make sure that all the blinds had to be shut down. And it was a crazy experience, but we felt really blessed and very fortunate that he would choose to start his government in a small firm like Ariel's.
Final question. Last year you became a Lincoln Laureate, which is the most important and prestigious prize. You spoke, I saw the video speaking at before the General Assembly. I mean, that's where the ceremony was. Talk about what that experience means from a young man from Illinois, growing up in Chicago, to be a Lincoln Laureate.
Well, it was really an honor. It's like being in the Hall of Fame for Illinois. And I just, again, felt very, very fortunate to be chosen. Melody Hobson had been chosen several years beforehand, so I was just catching up with her, and she's 11 years younger than I am, and going to be my successor at Ariel. But to be in that General Assembly area, it's just such a special, historic place, and to be able to, have the governor there, and it was, you'll never forget it. The one thing the story I told that day, years and years ago, Governor Thompson asked me to be on basically the board of Lincoln Academy to help pick the laureates each year. And they have this big event every year to elect the laureates and then, of course, get them inducted into the Lincoln Academy. And it's white tie and tails is what you're supposed to wear. Now, I had no idea what white tie and tails meant because, I had tuxedos for, go to a wedding, you go in a tuxedo, you go somewhere, you have to wear a black tie. I knew what black tie was, but I didn't know what white tie meant. I thought, and I went to Genghis to rent my tuxedo, and I said, I need a white tie and tails. They gave me a white tuxedo, white pants, white shoes, white shirt, white tie. So I show up, Governor Thompson's leading all of us into the General Assembly, and everyone is in white tie and tails, which is a black coat with tails and a white tie. So here I am. I'm the only black guy, of course, in the room, and I look like an ice cream cone, with chocolate ice cream cone, with chocolate on top. So it was one of the most embarrassing experiences of my life, and so I made sure I was dressed appropriately this time.
Is that photo in the Ariel lobby, John?
No, I don't think. Luckily, I think we destroyed all those photos.
Well, as we wind down, first of all, I wanted to thank Chancellor Lane for coming. He's had a busy day, and I know the Board of Trustees met, and so I know John was really grateful that you made the effort. And of course, Dean Davidson, who has done a terrific job at the law school, so thank her so much for coming. And if you had a final word or two, John, we again appreciate you coming down from a really busy schedule and visiting with the Institute. You had mentioned that you had known of Paul Simon earlier in your career and had great respect for him, so we really appreciate all you did to be here today.
I did get to know Paul Simon pretty well, being engaged in politics, and was very supportive of him in his career. And I always remember I was the finance chairman for Carol Moseley Braun when she ran for the United States Senate and became the first African American woman United States Senator. And it was a historic moment, but she hated raising money, and she hated making the calls you need to raise money for a campaign. So Paul felt so badly for her, he came over to my office and made all Carol's calls one afternoon to make sure that he was helping her reach all of those potential donors that she needed to help her, with her political career. And unfortunately she didn't win that second race, but it was cool to be a part of the history. And Paul Simon was such a great supporter of Carol. He was so progressive and knew that this was a special woman that deserved his support. So,
and I don't think Paul Simon loved fundraising, so that's a testament to just the importance he paid to supporting Senator Braun. So that's a great story.
Yeah,
so.
He was such a kind and warm leader. Someone you never forget when you had a chance to be in his presence. So it's special to be here to help honor him, and the work that you guys have done. I think it's so important.
Great. Well, again, let's thank John Rogers for just a terrific presentation. And John, you have a regular column in Forbes too, or you have over the years?
I used to years and years ago.
Okay.
But, not in a while.
But just on YouTube, you can see all sorts of some extended interviews with John. So continue to follow his career, and Ariel continues to do amazing work in Chicago and in the state of Illinois.
You mentioned YouTube. There is a fun video on YouTube. If you Google Michael Jordan, John Rogers, there's a video of me playing one-on-one with him at his fantasy camp that he used to have every year. So it's kind of it's a fun video, only like 4 minutes.
Who do you think won?
You got to watch it and see. We want more clicks or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's worth watching. So, again, thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.